Hello.
Hey
All right,
everyone.
we're live.
Hello, hello.
Hey, how you guys doing?
So my name is Amitai. I work at StarkWare. I'm the PM for for the Madara project, and also obviously I'm very involved in the StarkWare app chain offering.
Hey, everyone. I'm Terrence. I'm one of the co-founders of Cartridge. We've been building now in the StarkNet ecosystem for, I think, over 3 years, focused on building fully on-chain games and initially the Dojo ecosystem, and now leading the development of Dojo and contributing to basically every single fully on-chain game being developed in the StarkNet ecosystem through that effort.
Hey everyone, I'm Apur. I'm the founder of Carnot, and Carnot is an infra-focused company. We work heavily in the StarkNet ecosystem, so we do everything from like being involved in the core development of Madara and like making it mainnet ready recently. From there, we offer production-grade infrastructure services, so essentially RAS services if you want to run your own app chain. And we just announced our offering a few weeks ago as well. And along with that, we are also like one of the staking validators on StarkNet.
And I'll finish off. I'm Leo. I work at StarkWare, and I'm particularly involved in the BD side of appchains. Let's kick this off. So I'll be softly moderating the discussion, and this is mostly a platform for Amitai, Terrence, and Apoorv to shine. I want to start it off by talking on a high level about the SN stack. So we announced that the SN stack is now publicly available to the world. I want to start high level by actually just giving a high level overview of what the SN stack actually is, what the core components are. What does it mean to say we're opening the SN stack to the world? Amitai, maybe you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So basically, the SN stack is basically a lot of like foundational building blocks. So like you can, it starts from the VM, goes on to the blockifier, goes on to different components of the core contract, a lot of like basic like foundational building blocks in which we have different flavors, different different projects. StarkWare has its own implementation of the SN stack. Madara has its own one, and of course the Dojo has its own one, and each one prioritizes different different things and caters to different users, which kind of like gives you the best of both worlds, where the foundation is shared between the different stacks, giving you like safety, giving you basically a lot of eyes on the same code base, and basically leveraging well audited, highly engineered tech, while giving you the flexibility of different, basically catering to different types of users and different types of segments and use cases in mind. So I think in general, in high level, that's basically what the SN stack is.
Okay, so we've got a stack where we've got a strong foundation, and then you have different flavors, as you call them, that build on top of that. Maybe so you named the three flavors that are on there. Maybe it's a good idea to I want to dive a bit deeper into each of these three to talk a bit about how they differentiate themselves, and then also we could bring it back and talk as a whole when we look at the SN stack. How does it compare to the other stacks that are out there? But so maybe let's first talk about the different flavors.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with the StarkWare flavor. So basically, the StarkWare flavor is kind of like the OG. It's built on very strong foundations of StarkX. So basically, it has like a lot of years of basically like an experience of being in production, going through different scenarios of high stress and all these kind of different things. So I think StarkWare, the main reason to go with StarkWare, I think, would first of all be the high reliability of the stack itself. It's like heavily battle tested. I think also the StarkWare team, we built a lot of the core components, very, very big, have a lot of experience in running these kind of things in production. The reasons, I would say like kind of like the cons or the reason maybe why not to is the StarkWare stack is first of all, it's closed source, more just sort of like legacy reasons. Just like basically they wanted to reuse the current code of StarkX, wanted to go fast. And then like in a year from now, we already have like the next implementation, which is fully decentralized and fully open source, and hopefully like within a year or even less, we will like be fully open source. But in the meantime, if that will be one reason. If a project wants decentralization, then that's something they'll be getting kind of like for free using the StarkWare stack, which I think the other stacks, let them speak for themselves, probably have like later on in the roadmaps, if at all. But yeah, and I think it's not built from the ground up for appchains. It has Stark net in mind. That maybe also be another consideration for a team that wants to make funky changes or like high customizability. Maybe that's not the best option for them.
Apoorv, you want to give us your view?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I can talk about the Madara stack. So I think like a good place where Amitai ended the previous one is that StarkWare stack, like there's no doubt, is the OG stack. Right? That's the stack that has been running on like mainnet for so long. One of the reasons why Madara was started, and like fun fact for the people listening, the Madara stack actually started as an exploration team project from the StarkWare exploration team. And one of the purposes was because a lot of the StarkWare stack components are closed source. We didn't have anything at that point in time, which is like open source when you could spin up your own chain, just like Starknet. And to the best of my knowledge, I think Madara is the only open source version today where you can launch your own L2 which is like pretty much a replica of Starknet itself, right? So we're talking about everything from A to B. Like we still use StarkWare for the proving side of it. Not because like Stone is open source and technically you could do it, but it's just that like it's just much better to use the service that has been like battle tested for a lot of time. So yes, we still, for the proving part, you still use StarkWare, but yes, like all other components, whether it's like the bridging, the settlement contracts, the sequencing side of it, and like we could go on, the list is a long list, but all those things are today open source, and like Madara is the only option over there where you can run all of them. The docs are not that great. I think we'll come to that part later on. We're getting good at the docs, and hopefully like in the coming time, like anybody can just read a few lines in the docs and you can launch your own chain. So that was essentially one of the reasons why Madara started. But the second more important reason today why someone would want to choose the Madara stack is the customizability. So because it's open source, there are two parts to this. The first part is like, because it's open source, all the code is available to you. You don't need to rely on someone else to customize it. You could just get into the code and make the changes that you want. And we will very soon be like doing a demo of this, right? Like we'll be showing you some cool things on a chain that we launch, which is like going to be like the first of a kind on Starknet, right? Like just to give some examples of like cases that are possible in customizations is like autonomous contracts, where you have a contract being called at the beginning of every block. You have let's suppose like a private to the operator chain, right? So the transactions are available to the operator but not to the world. This is an example of a chain, I think, which Deutsche Bank is doing with zk, which definitely has a decent market. Then there are more customizations you can play on, like L3s, for example, right? Like L3s are possible because we're able to make changes in the code and tweak them to settle on Starknet instead of Ethereum. So those are like examples of things that you can fine tune because the stack is open source, and we'll also be doing something very interesting in this in the coming time. So yeah, to summarize it, Madara stack is the open source version. It's available for you to customize. To be able to customize it, and but yes, like the StarkWare stack, like Amitai mentioned, is like the OG barrel tested one.
Terence?
Cool. Yeah, so I mean, maybe it's useful to preface, the problem that we're trying to solve with the StarkNet stack and with subsequently L3s and some of the execution sharding work that we do is like meeting the demands of fully on-chain games. And games, historically are the most computationally intensive type of target that you can try to bring, fully on chain. It's obviously incredibly ambitious, and then has like very tight constraints around the performance that users and players expect. And so, we've been building out the Dojo toolchain for a couple of years now, and we have, I think, like over 30 studios building full time in a bunch of games. And some of the problems that they face, like Cairo and StarkNet is amazing at Cairo itself being able to express complex applications with a great language, and StarkNet itself being able to execute them on chain cheaply, but like, you know, it still has some constraints that make it challenging to put some types of games fully on chain. And primarily those are around the latency and the performance of the chain. So like, how fast can you sequence transactions? I mean, you know, as soon as you, for example, have like a decentralized layer like StarkNet that you're sequencing in like a particular location, you introduce latency issues. Like games traditionally, historically, like, you know, spin up servers very close to users to reduce latency. You want, you know, 20 millisecond latency. You want very fast transaction inclusion and sequencing. And so the technology that we've been building out with Katana and Saya, Katana being the sequencer, the execution sharding, that will serve as like the execution sharding operator in the future, and Saya, the settlement orchestrator, is specifically designed around solving those problems. And I think in conjunction with the products that we provide from Cartridge, with the controller and Paymaster and Slot, like the reason to choose Katana and Slot to operate an app chain is if you want to provide like a great user experience to your users, where they can feel like they're interacting with Web2 applications to a large extent, and you have performance sensitive applications. Like you want games where people can basically interact with them instantly. And in the future, with execution sharding, we'll be deploying, for example, sequencers right next to users, right, that can be sequenced and they can interact with for the duration of experience, and then settled onto StarkNet and be composable with kind of the global state of StarkNet. So, you know, Katana itself is fully open source as part of the Dojo stack, Saya as well. We've been, I think, leading the development in a lot of like the L3 settlement pipeline. We've kind of pushed on almost every single dimension of this to bring it to production. We recently, last week, approved and settled our first blocks on mainnet, and we'll be launching a demonstration of that very shortly as well. Katana itself is much simpler than the other offerings, like, you know, just significantly less code, and a much stronger focus on performance and simplicity. It does have support for extensibility, like things like the VRF can come natively with Slot and Katana. If you deploy a Katana chain with Slot, you get cartridge controllers out of the box, you get Paymaster out of the box, you get, you know, the sequencing infrastructure that we've been operating for a year now for the Dojo ecosystem, and is well battle tested alongside with it. All the settlement contracts and everything built in, as well as VRF, like all of the products that we're building kind of come integrated into the offering. So I think, like, from a positioning perspective, you know, the cartridge Slot Katana stack is kind of the batteries included version of this, just focused, you know, on user experience and performance.
Awesome. I think that was a really good comparison from the three of you of like within the stack of how the three flavors, like the core components of it, and then how the three flavors, you know, the different areas that they try to, or that they optimize for. I wonder now, taking it one step sort of out of the StarkNet ecosystem and looking how the stack itself, you know, and the individual flavors that you're building, how does it position itself, compare itself to other app chain stacks? So, right, suppose I'm a builder, I'm looking to build a roll up, an app chain, whatever it is. I'm looking to have more ownership around the infrastructure for whatever reasons I might have. How should I think about the StarkNet stack versus the others, and then what are take it how should I think about it, and what are some of the, you know, game-changing features, if we want to think of it like that?
Yeah, so maybe I'll touch upon so of course, basically, so ZK stacks today, there aren't any really good options out there, just because they're very expensive, and by far the ZK stack the SN stack is by far the cheapest, and it's very performant, and I think only for those reasons probably you know, worth going with. There's also a few other like totally step change, kind of like different like possibilities not possible with other stacks. So the things I would like single out was, of course, Bitcoin, which like StarkWare is like heavily investing in Bitcoin research and basically, you know, using Circle Starks to settle on Bitcoin. And once basically you go with the SN stack, you're the first one to be able to leverage this research and production. and also other types of Bitcoin research that StarkWare is pioneering. So in general, like the Bitcoin reason, I would say. Another thing I would like to highlight is the privacy aspect. So like we have kind of like two very interesting directions we're approaching. One is more related to like a project called Garaga from Feltroid that basically does very efficient elliptical pairing, allowing for growth 16 proofs to be verified on StarkNet, allowing to basically use Noyar out of the box. That's one interesting direction. Another interesting direction is using the Stu Prover, which is, from the different properties it has, it's very efficient to run in the client, allowing for basically client-side proving. So I think those are like really two reasons that are like very like strong differentiators from other stacks out there.
Yeah, I think like from our perspective, I mean, the reason why we originally started building in the StarkNet ecosystem years ago is it's, I think, the most credible kind of approach to scaling computation to the levels that are necessary to kind of represent an entire backend of a game fully on chain. And I think that remains the case today, and even more so with Stu coming online. Like, I think it's hard to, people don't really recognize the level of engineering work and optimization research that has gone into the provers and the provability of the StarkNet stack versus like a lot of the other approaches that had to make a lot of compromises to maintain, for example, EVM compatibility. What we found is almost everyone in our ecosystem came from building in the Ethereum ecosystem, and I love Ethereum, but for the type of applications that we're trying to build, Solidity wasn't a great fit for representing them. It's very hard to represent like the complexity of applications that we want to put on chain with Solidity. And then the EVMs and the provers themselves are not performant enough to enable the use cases that we want just from a cost perspective. And those things are both solved by the StarkNet stack, with Cairo being a modern language, like very Rust-like, as well as with the prover with Stone and then Stu, as you mentioned. I think the other thing that's particularly appealing to me about the StarkNet stack, and one of the reasons, again, that we've been committed to the ecosystem for such a long time, is this idea of fractal scaling and the ability of Stu to perform client-side proving, or to like fractally scale a chain where you can essentially like shard it, something that we're working on with execution sharding, all within the same language and efficiently on consumer devices. I think like a lot of other approaches today that we're seeing, essentially like you're pushing proving to specialized ASICs in data centers. You're not in it, like you can get great performance numbers, but only with expensive machines. Which means there's a bunch of use cases that you can't take advantage of around client-side proving, for example, or around allowing anyone to participate in the operations of these types of networks. And I think like, those set of trade-offs, I think makes StarkNet very unique compared to all the other approaches where, it's, I think in a large part due to their kind of insistence on having EVM compatibility, which I think we've seen play out in the last like few months as being not the biggest differentiator for Ethereum. Like, that we've seen now other VMs start to that had different kind of trade-offs start to accrue a lot of market share. So I think that decision to service that and maintain that compatibility forced them to make decisions that made a lot of trade-offs on the performance side, on the developer experience side, that kind of just set like a ceiling for those chains. So I think StarkNet is very unique and kind of pioneering a whole new stack, a whole new approach, and being able to work around a lot of those limitations.
Essentially, like if I had to compare this with if I had to compare the Essence stack with other stacks, like I would divide into like two categories. The first one is like just optimistic versus ZK, and then once you decide you want to do ZK, then what does the comparisons look like, right? So if you're in the first category, if you're figuring out do we do optimistic or ZK, then the advantage is that if you're doing a ZK stack, then you don't have to wait for like the fast withdrawal times on the L1, right? And why does that matter to you is even if you like do optimistic and like there are these money market people who create their bridges, they're going to charge for the fact that their withdrawals will be stuck for like 7 days when they're withdrawing, and those will just make withdrawals expensive or bridging expensive. Whereas with ZK, you can do that like faster. That's one. And second is like we have state diffs. I think we, along with ZK Sync, are the only two stacks today which have state diffs. And the reason that makes a difference is because we won't be, when blobs start congesting, which the current pattern shows that they will start congesting very soon. State diff based applications will have an advantage because like we just don't have to submit all transactions. We just have to submit the difference of the states, which is also part of the reason I think why like StarkWare was able to do like 800, 900 TPS, whereas I don't know if other stacks can sustain those TPS for a long period of time. Now once a stack has decided that hey, I want to do like ZK, then I think the comparison comes down to there's a ZK stack, there is Polygon CDK, and there is probably succinct zero just uses ZK VM, and like there's probably us. So with Polygon CDK, I don't know what the status is. I haven't really heard a lot for a long time. So like would love to get any updates from Polygon. And the ZK Syncs, from the numbers that we have from the ZK Sync and the RIS0 succinct side of things, I think I'm sort of confident that we are the most affordable option available. I think like succinct has publicly put out benchmarks saying that per transaction they cost like 0.5% or something. And if you do the math out, if you want to do like a basic 10 TPS chain with like their stacks, it's going to cost you like multiple thousand. Like I think the numbers go up to like $100,000. Whereas with StarkNet, like Carnot today is already offering a similar thing with like $5,000 a month. So I think those are like the numbers out there, and like this is how it compares to other stacks.
So if I recap what all of you just said, I think broadly there are some there's an aspect of being battle tested and just being performant. There's an aspect of there are certain step function changes, if you will. So those are maybe things related to privacy. There's the Bitcoin side of things, right? If the stack enables you to either be or become as well a native Bitcoin L2, then that opens up some very interesting, like it's just a completely new, not completely new, but it's a very new and very untapped design space. Terrence, you made some very interesting points around, fractal scaling and client-side proving, and what that sort of, again, right, a different design space that's very interesting to explore. And Apoorv, you mentioned like good framework of, okay, you have the optimistic versus ZK side, and then if you decide to go the ZK route, then there's the affordability aspect, and again maybe the battle tested part. I want to maybe so said Terrence, I actually wanted to follow up with what you said with fractal scaling. I'm curious how you see, with what you're doing with fully on-chain gaming, like something that really requires a lot of computation, really squeezes all of the juice out of scaling technology. How do you see a future in 5 to 10 years if fully on-chain game sort of follows the path that you would like it to follow? How do those worlds and how do the worlds look like? How do the ecosystems look like? Yeah, any visuals that you have there would be interesting.
It's a great question. I mean, I think like a lot of our kind of approaches to just lean into like the emergent nature of the space. We have a bunch of teams building like interesting stuff and kind of doubling down on the things that are working. We recently saw, I mean, one of the, I think, most concrete examples of this idea of like an autonomous world, which is what some people to refer to this idea as, is the Realms ecosystem, where you have this, DAO that was spun up as a derivative of Loot, or like as a ecosystem based on the Loot project a number of years ago, and still exists today, and has a bunch of very passionate and a very active developer community contributing to the development of it. It mostly in an off-chain sense, but more recently we've seen like a lot of those experiments start to go to be deployed on chain. So you have like Eternum, for example, which was just recently launched, and despite like the some of the technical issues that it faced initially, they're mostly due to like kind of like the unexpected demand for it. I think it starts to like paint a picture of what these experiences start to look like in the future. I think from like a fractal scaling perspective, I think like what we see already is that, even one well-adopted game can saturate, when you have like a chain like StarkNet or any other blockchain, even, like the higher throughput chains, like whatever Mega ETH or whatever, like eventually, they're just never, you can't vertically scale your way out. Like eventually you need to horizontally scale. Fractal scaling essentially is like a horizontally scaling like kind of architecture that is essentially boundless in the amount of computation you can put on chain. And what we saw with Eternum and games like Flippy Flop and stuff like that, like even one successful game or active game can kind of saturate the bandwidth of a network, right? And you can squeeze out another 10x here and there, but like that means then you can then have 10 games, and obviously there's a lot more demand than for 10 games, and these games even are in their infancy with not that many people playing them. So the fractal scaling architecture allows essentially to take something like Eternum and play the season entirely in its own like execution shard, right? Like because like for the duration of a game like Eternum, or like a game in like, for example, Jokers of Neon, which is like a kind of poker type game, like for the duration of the game, you don't need like this global composability with like DeFi state and AMMs and NFT marketplaces and all these kind of things that make a lot of sense to exist on StarkNet, but isn't necessary for the duration of the game that you're playing. And so fractal scaling with the technology that we're building with Katana and Saya inside of the Dojo ecosystem, and with Slot with Cartridge, allows us to just move that execution off chain. And I think we'll see more and more of this as we go forward. I mean, I think like, I think that generally, kind of the gradient of like technological progress like favors verifiable computation in a similar way that encrypted network communication. When I was young, like nothing was HTTPS, and now everything is HTTPS, right? Like everyone wants that integrity in their network connection, and I think the same thing will be true for verifiable computation over a long enough time span. And the only way to bring all this computation on chain to enable these like grand ideas of these fully on chain like digital worlds is through fractal scaling. And so that's why in particular we've been focusing on that scaling architecture, and that's something that StarkWare team introduced probably like almost over 3 years ago in a blog post, and subsequently you've seen like a lot of other approaches that maybe in most cases are like different rebrandings of the same idea, right? Like on an ag layer and stuff like this, like is really like fundamentally a very similar idea to something that you guys were pioneering a very long time ago.
Yeah, I remember that blog post, and it's interesting that like it's still quoted and referred today in some tweets, and so it was an interesting it was an interesting, it introduced a way to think about the space that was interesting. Apoorv, I want to ask you a related question. So I think Terrence gave a good picture of you can imagine very heavy games needing needing to scale like in such fractal ways. And from your perspective, what kinds of if you think of use cases or projects for that have where a ZK stack like the Ascent stack could be interesting, where does your mind go to?
Right. So to give like few examples of like use cases where an app chain just makes like more sense is I think I also like tweeted this like a few days ago or something, but like number one is like if you're doing something that's has like high traffic and you probably want to like abstract like gas fees. Like if I just give like very specific examples for now, and then like maybe I can just generalize, like categorize the examples. But if I give very specific examples, like let's suppose I'm building an exchange like Paradox, or I assume like DYDX also did that when it was with StarkX. But like I'm building an exchange, I'm doing like a lot of TPS. I think like let's assume I think I did this math with like 1 million transactions a day or something, which turns out is like it's not a lot of TPS, but like 1 million transactions a day. And if I want to like make the experience gasless for my customers, it's not like I cannot do this. I can do this on like public chains if the infra is right. But it's like on Solana, I think when I did the math, it was costing you like a few $1,000s a day. Right? Even if I made it like 10x cheaper, it would be like I think it was like $20,000 a month or something like around that ballpark. right? I can do that on my own app chain today for much, like way cheaper cost. Like I said, like we can do that like probably with like a few $1,000s a month. uh, so that's like the one thing. Like if you want to like have something like some application like this, an app chain just makes sense. Doing it on a public chain at that high level traffic is probably not going to be feasible. We're also seeing, like, I think on Solana there's this app called Zeta Markets, which was like on Solana. Now they're moving it out to their own chain called Bullet, just to like optimize the experience. Another example is like you just want to customize things at the protocol level, right? So for example, you want to do like things like autonomous contracts. I think like the cartridge team does use autonomous contracts. Maybe Terence can correct me, but like something like let's suppose I want to have a logic where at the beginning of every block, let's say there's going to be like an oracle tick, or I want to run an AI agent at the beginning of every block. There's no way to do this like on a public chain. You can build like this fancy infra, you can do the nonce management, fee management, and all that stuff. Whereas if it's your own chain, I'll just like, like just add like 1-2 lines and it works. And this is something that we are doing in one of the new experiments that we're going to run, and we'll show it to everyone. This is something that we are doing. There are other examples. For example, like I mentioned in the beginning, right? Like use cases. For example, there are like in the fintech space, there is value for apps, or like value for building business logics which are like verifiable, but they don't want it to be like public to it. Like there has to be privacy, right? And I'm not talking about like the extreme privacy, which like what a lot of times people try to solve in Web3, where like even the operator has no idea what's going on. I'm talking about privacy which exists in Web2, like a Revolut knows your balance, but doesn't mean that like all Revolut users knows each other's balance, right? So that's totally fine. Like Web2 is working that way. The only thing that if we can somehow add verifiability on this, so that like like FTX is like verifying that this is the only logic I'm running, and this is the fact that I own the balances, or like so on, then there's a lot of value to it, right? And like there are these interesting ideas like the Finternet, which is exploring something very similar. How do we get verifiability, but we don't care that much about like uh, extreme privacy? The operator, if the operators can see that like the balances or the data, it's fine. That's another use case. It's only possible on an app chain, right? If you want to do this on a public chain, implement things like FHE or like other like fancy things which are like much more complicated. I'm not saying there's no value to it. It's just more complicated. So you got to figure out like what's the right tool for the job. If your users are okay with the operator knowing the data, just go ahead with that. Um and like just in general, so like basically if I had to categorize these things, they're mostly, a lot of times it comes down to stuff like customizations. Like treat your own app chain as your own server. Don't think of it like it's like a public chain and you're bounded by its constraints. Just do whatever you want on top of it.
Gotcha. So you have, okay, so that's that you have the customizability aspect. You have the, I don't know exactly what to call it, but like fractal scaling and extreme scaling, and sometimes like Terence, like you mentioned, with ephemeral instances, right, that don't need to necessarily live on forever. Amitabh, before you also, I like this framing a lot. You talked about these step changes, right? Once you add, core elements of privacy or a Bitcoin aspect to it, like a settlement to a different L1 or to multiple L1s. One thing we didn't touch on that maybe glues, a lot of things that we've discussed together is the idea of interop between, interop between chains in general, but we can start maybe more simply if interop between, chains with at least built on a similar stack. And then I don't know like, how far you want to take it, but we can also talk about interop more broadly. But maybe first just interop within sort of a more like roll-up app chain ecosystem built on a similar stack with the Ascent stack. Would love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, that's a great question. Something that we're like looking at, basically, like the way I see it. So there's kind of like it starts from an island, basically, and only like even if the app chains were siloed, that could already like be huge. Like DYDX in a lot of ways was pretty siloed. Like you just bridged over your USDC, and then like you can build amazing like perpetual applications out of it, prediction markets. So basically, like many applications or gaming don't really need interop. So I'm saying like right now, the way I see it, like regarding the roadmap, so like we're focused very much on getting like single app chains like very easy to use and very like robust, easy to use. And then basically basically as at the same time we're also basically looking into interop. Then there's basically like high level, there's like async and synchronous. So like I personally am a bit bearish on synchronous, at least like at such an early stage. I feel like that's like makes more sense maybe down the road. And I think a lot of like only like even asynchronous interrupt in even that would be like a huge unlock for applications. So basically, I see that also as some sort of spectrum. Basically, like we have even today, we have Hyperlane, we have an implementation in Cairo, and we could easily just spin that up. It's modular, it's permissionless. You can like do appchains could basically deploy a Hyperlane mailboxes, it's called, and start interoperating. And then basically, like the idea is to try to get it deeper into the stack itself and add functionality, reduce latency, and increase security. That's kind of like the spectrum we're working towards. And that I kind of see like as a like more of a thousand let a thousand experiments bloom, not some sort of like high level like the perfect scalability architecture. So there's an example right now. We have like Herodotus. They have their S2S solution that they proposed, and we have the guys at Castor Labs, which are also Madara core developers, are already working on a POC to show it in production and start like testing it. So that's like one direction. Another direction, we're in talks with the guys at Informal Systems. They did the IBC and Cosmos. They're working on a IBC implementation in Cairo, and we're basically looking into some sort of IBC based solution. And then basically we're open to a lot of ideas that are like always floating and coming up. I think like the biggest unlock that we have to offer is like Stew being so like cheap and fast makes like async but like really fast communication basically possible. And that's definitely something that we're like be looking into basically this quarter, and hopefully like by the end of the quarter we'll be having some sort of initial design to start like rolling out and like and seeing. And something that I'm thinking a lot about. Even just today we had a talk with L2B regarding like governance and like does interop require having like fixed parameters. Like all of a sudden like superchain are very unflexible on what the chains can deploy. And like intuitively, I wouldn't want to have us impose these restrictions. Like you can't use this data availability solution, or you can't use this VM or stuff like that. I want to like have a lot of experimentation. So that's why I think like in the end it will be some sort of spectrum, where, and in a lot of ways it's kind of like what Arbitrum are going towards with their cluster solution, where they're kind of like a cluster of chains trust each other and they like interop under certain trust assumptions, but then like other chains that that you feel like less comfortable because they made different architectural decisions. Maybe you have to have like different type of trust assumption, which maybe increase a bit of latency. So I think that's kind of like where I'm standing. I'd actually love to hear maybe the thoughts of maybe Terrence and Apoorv. One last point I would like to make is also I think L3s is something that we're like pushing forwards. Just yesterday, the guys in Carnot settled the first Madara block on StarkNet, and the guys at Cartridge with Vsoft already did that like a week or two ago. So L3s are pretty much a reality, and I think having StarkNet as a coordination layer could be like really big, really advantageous to like add maybe even like on Cisco level adds interop, like basically it's kind of like in a lot of ways kind of like the AG layer, but like kind of as a bonus. So that's another like direction I'm thinking about.
On our end, yeah, I think everything Amitai mentioned is quite interesting. I think like we are exploring additionally like another path, which is like with execution sharding, how you can support like parallelizable threads and access like shared state on the settlement layer. So like if you have, for example, an item that you want to use in like two instances of a game simultaneously, or you have like a balance that there's like an entry fee to join one game, and then you spin up another game in parallel, like which can happen quite frequently when you have games that can last like weeks or something like that. How can they operate on some like like shared state on the underlying layer in parallel. And I think that's like, essentially some form of interoperability with the settlement layer. And like the exploration there is basically based on constraining the type system to CRDT types that are natively integrated into the Dojo toolchain that allows you to do that. And so for us, like kind of like we mentioned earlier, in a lot of cases when you're inside of a dungeon instance or playing like a particular type of game, like the execution scope is much more narrow. It's not the global execution context, and so you might not need interoperability with like DeFi protocols and stuff like that for the duration of that execution. And so, our focus in the short term is primarily focused on just like how can we spin up like a lot of execution charts for players.
And Apoorv, also want to hear your take, but I'm curious as a player, what does that feel like? Like what does that experience what does that experience feel like? What do I notice? What do I not notice? What steps do I have to take? And you can abstract, you can like I don't know how to say it, but put yourself also in shoes in the future, how you'd like it to be and how you foresee it to be. But yeah, take me from a player's point of view.
So from a player's point of view, like essentially, like the goal is that it's fully abstracted. You don't know about it at all, and that's something that we've already, all of the tools that we've been building and all the infrastructure and with the controller and paymaster and stuff has all been in service of this. Like today already, a lot of teams use Slot for playtesting, and if you have a controller on mainnet, you have a controller on Sepolia, you have a controller on every single Slot instance that will ever exist, right? We've done like some abstraction of like the StarkNet RPC and stuff to enable this. So like you kind of factually have an account that always exists across all of these chains. And the experience from the user perspective will be something just like this, right? Like with controller and paymaster and sessions, like you create a session to play a game. The transactions to initialize the chain are done behind the scenes. You get like this execution shard. It locks like some resource on the L1 on the settlement chain, StarkNet or whatever, and the operator sequences all the transactions for a game. The player has no idea that their computation has been moved from StarkNet to an execution shard, and then like at the end, like once the computational that instance run or the game or whatever is completed, it gets proved and settled back into StarkNet. With Stew, you might just have a couple minutes of latency between the game, ending and then them being able to unlock their items or like the rewards from it on the underlying layer. And so I think like, eventually, and I think actually like one of the very first demonstrations of this technology that we do will be like 90% of the way there. You won't know, it's like when you interact with and Web2 application, you don't know where it's routing your request, like to which server, in which region, whatever. Like you can find it out if you like really wanted to like look at it technically, but from a user's perspective, you don't care about that, right? You just want to play a game with low latency and have a good time with your friends.
I guess in most of Web3 or the crypto space, a lot of people weirdly do care about this intermediate step. Like, that you have to bridge, and to bridge, you need to convert, and maybe you need to bridge, like use different bridges, etc. So the awareness of the plumbing has been baked into us, so to speak. But it's also like self-selection to some extent. Yeah.
It's just funny because that's just like we're all basically early adopters, and that's just like a symptom of being like really like early. Because like on the internet in the past, it was also like that. Like you have to spin up, you have to be very aware of the protocol that you're using and stuff like that. So
yeah, and even then you're still. Yeah, the experience is really terrible with like something like MetaMask and switching chains and adding chains and stuff like that. And it's so complicated that, in theory, the people that thought up these things are technical people, and they're like, oh, like let's expose everything so people can understand the decisions that they're making. But in practice, like people have no fucking idea what you're asking them to do, and they just say yes, 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 yes. And so, it only benefits like some small subset of like technical people that understand these like underlying complexities, and then the vast majority of people, they're just like anxious about every single button they click on the blockchain because you've decided that you don't want to handhold them through anything. And so every interaction has the possibility of just fully rugging them. It's not a great situation.
Apoorv, I'm curious, from the Madara and Carnot side, how do you think about interop? And same question there, from a user's perspective, right? How does that feel? What does it look like?
So I was like, firstly, I would like just double click on what Amitai said is that, like, I think today we are on this stage where we are like building our islands. Like once we have the islands ready, that's when we start focusing on like, okay, how do we build those ships around it? But yes, like when that happens, like how I see this playing out is, I think a few months ago or years ago, like there was a lot of questions on like how the technology is going to mature to make something like this possible. I think with like the recent numbers and the recent trends that we are seeing, like how quickly like ZK is just getting more and more performant, it's getting more clear that it's going to start becoming less of a technical bottleneck, and it's going to become more of a standardization thing. Like how do we create the right standards so that if I have like 10 app chains running on like whether it's StarkNet or it's like 10 L2s, although like there's another discussion, like if you have L2s, then like message passing on Ethereum is expensive, so you do something like Agler or like whatever it is. But let's assume like there are like app chains on top of StarkNet for now. So I think with stuff like Stu and like the performance improvements, it's going to start becoming less of a problem of being technically possible or being cheap, and probably becoming more of a problem of like defining the correct standards. Like if app A wants to message app B and app B wants to message app C and so on, what are those standards that we need to follow? How do we make the wallet experiences like really seamless? Like Terence said, I don't want to be switching wallets continuously. Like how do I make an app still feel like it's just a smart contract? Like I shouldn't feel like this is an app chain. And one very like important thing that I would like to point out is like one of the advantages that StarkNet has compared to like other ecosystems is like every other EVM ecosystem is using MetaMask, right? So if Arbitrum is going to develop a standard, or if Optimism is going to develop a standard, or like MetaMask is probably not going to like say like let's use your standard. We have that advantage in StarkNet in the sense like we have wallets that are specifically built for StarkNet. So we don't need to convince 10 other ecosystems to follow the standard, at least within the ecosystem. Obviously, if there's going to be like a global L2 standard, then like StarkNet should probably follow that for like across stacks or across L2s. But within the StarkNet ecosystem itself, we have our own indexes, we have our own SDKs, we have our own wallets, which makes the problem like relatively easier for us, the standardization problem compared to like others. So yes, I do imagine like at the end game of this, it's going to be like using app chains without knowing it's an app chain. Like it should just be an app.
Cool. I want to leave a couple minutes for questions from the comments. So everyone listening or watching, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. And already a few. Well, before we do that, I want to maybe close it off by asking, asking maybe specifically you, Terence and Apoorv. So building on Madara and Dojo, what will that, if I'm a team or builder interested in doing that, what will it look like? What should I do? What kind of things can I customize, for example, from maybe a technical perspective, from a branding perspective? Just basically walk me through what I can expect and hope for, and how I should approach this.
So on the cartridge Dojo side, if you just looking to launch an app chain, the interface for doing that will be through Slot. So we support this already. You can spin up today like testnet instance for you to play around with, and you can check out docs.cartridge.gg to check it out. The stack is like entirely open source, and we'll have some guides on reproducing it all locally at some point as well. Just to provide more credibility to the tool chain. If you're interested in building applications with Dojo and taking advantage of like kind of the full suite of the capabilities that Dojo offers with the automatic indexer and the different SDKs and eventually like the execution sharding stuff, the best starting point is dojoengine.org. So check that out. You can also just follow us on Twitter, or feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to help. Very shortly, We'll make all of this stuff, like the actual mainnet production deployments of things, possible as well through the slot UI or slot interface. Yeah, it should be relatively straightforward to get everything spun up, and you'll have cartridge controller, paymaster, all these different things like available automatically. From a white labeling perspective, it's something we already support as well with the cartridge controller. A lot of teams have a white label version and verified sessions where you can just ask the user to approve some scope so you can execute transactions on their behalf. So happy to take care of all of that stuff for any teams interested in it as well.
Right. And on the Madara side of things, if you're someone who's listening to this and you want to start playing around, first and foremost, join the Madara Telegram and make sure you shoot us all questions you get. The docs are being worked upon as we speak, but till we are there, where docs are good enough for you to just refer to them, everyone in the Carnot team, or I'm sure in the Madara team, are happy to act like customer support for you. So just send whatever messages you have on the Telegram, and we'll be super happy to answer them there, get on calls. That's one. Second is if you don't want to bother setting up your own stack locally, we already offer free devnets and testnets. So we'll set up Carnot as a company. We can set up a running chain, a running bridge, explorer, faucet, everything for you, and you can just get kicked off the ground. That is the second thing. The third exciting thing which is coming up is that hopefully in 1-2 weeks we'll be announcing an exciting accelerator program for budding teams that have interesting ideas and want to try things out. So that should be super interesting. Doesn't mean you need to wait for those 1-2 weeks. You can already reach out to me and we can start discussing. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Maybe I'll just touch upon, since I'm also the Madara PM. We're also focusing, laser focused to get Madara to be 3 clicks. We're building an awesome CLI. Shout out to Moonsong that are doing a lot of the work on it, and basically cleaning it up and making it user ease of use, documentation. That's something that we're focusing on, and please do in a month from now or even now, you can spin up your own devnet, try it out. Any feedback we'd love to hear, and we'd be happy to basically make it even more seamless.
Super. Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you guys very much for taking the time. I want to look at some of the questions that we got in the comments. So let me see if I can show them. Okay, this works, I think. So first, Victor asks if we can talk about the main use cases for client-side proving. And it's particularly in the context of appchains here. Amita, you want to?
Actually, I think Karen should take that, since I think you're the primary user.
I think the obvious use case for client-side proving is privacy. If you ever want privacy on chain, you need to do it locally on your own machine. Otherwise, you inherently have to reveal information to other participants. So that's one of the first things you get with client-side proving. Other interesting things that you can get is a lot of computations that you would want to do that you could potentially do on chain are very expensive. For example, if you want to do an aggregation over a sequence of events that happened over a few blocks, right? For example, if you wanted to prove that, let's say in the context of games, you have a quest that's if you did the daily quest 30 times, you can get some reward for that, right? If you wanted to do that computation on chain, it's adds, first of all, overhead to every single interaction to track that, even though you might never actually claim it. And second of all, it's it adds, it's quite complex to do on chain. It's something that is relatively straightforward to prove off chain, right? Using the verifiability of the blockchain to generate a proof on the client, and then just submit it to the chain and say I did this. I think there's generally a lot of other, and I think it's less necessarily client-side proving, and it's more just off-chain proving and on-chain settlement. So doing some off-chain computation in the context, it could be of on the client's device, it could be in some bespoke application server or whatever, and then verified on chain. I think that opens up a lot of other interesting use cases around zk-TLS and a bunch of NPC things. So I think there's it's again like a new design space that we're only really starting to scratch the surface. Like a lot of the existing research is just in kind of the privacy dimension of it. And I think as we get Stu and with Cairo and kind of commoditize or make this technology much more accessible, we'll see a lot of like creative applications of the technology to enable new things that weren't possible to do on chain, but now can be like integrated on chain.
I'll add to the privacy idea that so Paradox, who are a fantastic team and very, 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 very strong, not on this call, but so they're building their own exchange on the SN stack, and client-side proving for privacy is something that they're very seriously looking into, and that is also a big unlock if you think of that space. I mean, Tai, did you want to say something or?
Oh yeah, I was pretty much along the same lines, but I think that like my vision is having some sort of Bitcoin plus privacy could be like a really really good like user experience for like traders to like Bitcoin traders to trade anonymously or not leak alpha at a very early stage of the trade. I think it's also a very really cool use case that like we're thinking about.
I think a lot of these step changes. I go back to your framing. A lot of these step changes are very powerful, especially once you start combining them. So yeah, like let alone what you can do with. I'll just say two words, right? Like gaming fully on-chain games that scale at an incredible proportion, settling on Bitcoin. Like I don't know, does that make sense? I don't know, but it's a fun, interesting thing to think about. And once you have these step changes, it opens these design spaces that are just very cool and a ton of fun and like very promising to build on. So Star Connect asks, is there anything for the community too?
So maybe I'll touch upon that for a second. So like the framing we see in general as app chains, it's like it's not doesn't like cannibalize StarkNet usage. It's just very orthogonal. There are many teams that it's like a hard requirement for them to become an app chain, and they just would have passed on joining our ecosystem, and there's like a net positive basically joining us. So I think that's just like one really strong way that the StarkNet ecosystem benefits from this. Like a lot of strong teams that we wouldn't, that they have a hard preference for app chains all of a sudden become relevant. That's one. And the second thing is, yeah, like there will be some sort of basically like arrangement where basically there is like a benefit, like where we align different apps with stakeholders and the StarkNet project. Also, by the way, us using L3s, so it's also a really strong like alignment mechanism since all the assets of L3s sit on StarkNet, and they could also be using the staking. You could do like restaking. So once you're in L3, there's like a whole design space where, or for example, like Dojo, where you do like sharding, where you only the off-chain logic is done off-chain, but then it settles back in like for every session. So I think there's a lot of different ways. I think we're kind of like a bit early, and like we're bringing a lot of like pretty amazing tooling out there. Then we'll kind of see like the design patterns on like how things tie back into StarkNet. But those are my thoughts.
Nice. And then Victor asks again, what's the plan for interop? We've covered this, but maybe very TLDR version. If someone asks about interop, what would you say?
Maybe a Purv. He did a lot of thinking back in the day on interop.
So what I would say is that it's definitely something that we are thinking of. In fact, just during this call, like Nathan from Custard Labs created a group on Telegram just saying SN Stack interop. So like definitely we are thinking of it. And but yeah, I would say like we're fixing we're like first getting the few islands up and running, and then we like work on connecting them. But like I know there are like interesting solutions where Herodotus is doing the S2S thing. With Stu is live and production ready, like we'll have the option to do like actual like trustless interop. So I think like probably the best way to do this is like formalize the maybe the design and like get feedback from the community, what are this thing, and like go ahead from there.
I do want to just mention that we have Madara has an exploration branch led by Custer Labs. Shout out to them. And they're like basically looking a lot into this, and they're doing a lot of POCs. So we're kind of like, once like Madara is kind of like Madara Core, Madara Exploration. So, while Madara Core is focusing on, like the islands, let's call it, we already have Madara Exploration exploring already the next frontier, which is interop.
All right. Sounds awesome. Let's see. Tuan Tran asks a very good and important question. Is this available open source?
The Dojo toolchain and Katana and Saya and everything is available open source on GitHub. The organization is GitHub/Dojo Engine. But again, if you go to dojoengine.org, you can find it all from there. And everything we do is open source, so you can definitely find everything.
Yeah, same for Madara. It's the GitHub is Madara -alliance, and you can find all the code over there.
And I'll say about StarkWare. So currently, parts of the stack aren't open source. But if you look online at StarkWare Libs dash sequencer, you'll see the next gen sequencer fully Rust, fully optimized, and in less than a year from now, that will be like the canonical stack that StarkWare will be running, fully open source.
Fantastic. On those good closing words, I think it's been an hour. So thank you everyone for being with us and listening and for your good questions. Amitai, Terrence, Apoorv, any closing words?
No.
And where can people find you?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, you can find me on Twitter. But of course, like in general, like you can write on first of all, join the Madara Telegram. You can also join the, of course, StarkNet ecosystem Telegram and Core Stars Telegram, and of course, DM us, and we're available there as well.
Yeah, same. You can find me. Best place is Twitter, Terrence VA. Connect with us there. We're happy to introduce anyone that's interested in exploring the space. We do have an incubation program, and we're accepting applications for that as well through Cartridge. There's up to 25K in grants through the foundation that are available at like kind of one of the beginning tiers. So if you're interested in building in the space, I think there's a lot of interesting designs and new applications to be built. The Dojo toolchain is much more mature now and stable. We have a bunch of very active community, a bunch of people building interesting fully on-chain games with the technology. It's a fun place to be. So if you're interested in checking it out, definitely hop in or reach out to me, and happy to connect anyone that's looking to build something cool.
Yeah, and same. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm Apoorv Sedana everywhere, Telegram, Twitter, and feel free to join the Madara Telegram and reach out. Really, really excited to see the new appchains that are going to come up this year.
Sweet. Future's bright. Let's end it there. Thank
Bye-bye.
you all. Appreciate
Thank you
it.
all.